So hello, good evening from my side. This talk is about Playwright, changing the guard. First of all, I'd like to introduce myself. So my name is Hahnekamp. I come from Austria. That's why I said good evening. I am member of Angular Architect. So we do consulting and training in the Angular area. And my special focus, one could say something like this, is in the testing. So we do quite a lot of in terms Cypress, of course, Playwright, Chest and that stuff. I also do some community work. So I have my own YouTube channel. I also have something which is called NG News. That's an Angular newsletter, which is published on a weekly basis. And lately I have also worked on something which is called Sheriff. This is something like an ES-linter for lightweight modularity, let's put it like this. Not like the hard stuff that you do with an X, but for very lightweight things. But today, this talk is, as I said, about Playwright. And the goal, or it is targeted for developers that are currently already using some kind of end-to-end framework, maybe are a little bit unhappy with it. Maybe you have already heard about Playwright and are wondering yourself if this might be a good fit or not. I want to start with the current status when we look at the market, if you allow me to say it like this, of the end-to-end tools where I've kind of excluded Playwright for now. But we see that in the blue line that Cypress is the #1 end-to-end framework, and I guess the majority of all the Angular users are also using it. But we also see two competitors maybe, which is in this case is the Selenium WebDriver and WebDriver IO. So they both have the term WebDriver in them. And in a way, we can say we are dealing with two main technologies, namely the WebDriver-based technology and Cypress. And I want to quickly give a comparison between these two, because that will ultimately lead us to Playwright, because Playwright tries to do more or less the middle way. But when we take a look at Selenium or WebDriver, then the way how the end-to-end test works, if we're using WebDriver, is that our tests are always running outside of the browser, which has the advantage that our test has full control over the browser, but there is a middleware or an abstraction layer required because somebody needs to translate the test commands into the browser commands, so to say. And in the case of WebDriver, that something is called the WebDriver. And it gives us also the option that we can do something which is called cross-browser testing. So we can test quite a huge range of browsers. And unfortunately, as good as it sounds, so adding an abstraction layer is something we do quite often, but as good as it sounds, there is one drawback, because these kind of tests, they are known to be very flaky. So this means they are not really reliable. They fail sometime, we don't know what it is. The application just works fine. And of course, that's not good. So if we cannot trust our tests, then we are in a not very optimal situation. And also in terms of developer experience, so if you've worked with Selenium, you know that there is maybe some space for improvement. So this is it about WebDriver / Selenium in general. Then we have Cypress. Cypress does more or less the opposite. So Cypress doesn't run the tests outside of the browser, it runs them inside of the browser. So in the end, this means that our JavaScript that we need to write a test is directly injected into the browser. And this is, of course, very easy for somebody, for the framework, because we don't need this abstraction layer anymore. Our test code has direct access to the DOM elements. So it makes it way more easier and also more reliable. So with Cypress, we really have very non-flaky tests, but there are also some disadvantages. First of all, we are limited in the functionality because test code runs inside of the browser. We don't have all the possibilities. There are some security issues, and there are some things we can't really test, like we cannot really boot up different tabs. That's not going to happen, and some other stuff. What is also very important to understand in Cypress is that Cypress said we don't use WebDriver, so we don't go against, we don't want to provide the same cross-browser experience that WebDriver does. We are focusing on the Chromium family mainly, which means we can then also use the protocol that the Chromium browser more or less understands, which is CDP, so the Chrome DevTools protocol. And This protocol is much better suited for the applications of today, because with the WebDriver protocol, it was written at a time when everything was kind of server-side rendered. So it was very easy for the WebDriver tests to know when they need to continue with the next action or with the next command, because every user event more or less triggered a round trip to the server, re-rendered the page, and so on. So it was very easy. But then with JavaScript applications, single page applications, Angular, things started to change. So first of all, the page is not reloaded anymore. And second, we don't really know from the perspective of an end-to-end framework when the application is in a state where it is now ready, where it is ready for the next command. Because this WebDriver protocol doesn't give the testing framework enough information of what's going on in the browser. With CDB that Cypress is using, that changes, because CDB is way more valuable, is richer in terms of information. So Cypress definitely know what's going on, and it can do all this awaiting and retriability that makes these tests really stable. And this is now also the case where kind of Playwright jumps in. So Playwright, some key facts, tries to do, as I already said, it kind of tries to do the middle way. It first of all says, yes, we are also using CDB as Cypress does. So we are in a way kind of limiting ourselves to the Chromium family. It's not like that anymore, but I will discuss this later. So we use CDB, but we run our tests outside of the browser. So again, we take full control over the browser, but of course we have to accept that then there is some kind of abstraction layer necessary, so it's not that easy. What is also important about Playwright is that they say we try to provide everything from one hand. So we produce more or less everything on our own. Whereas in Cypress, we have quite a huge dependencies to jQuery, Mocha, and all that stuff. In Playwright, that's not the case. You just install Playwright, you have one dependency, and that's it. Strong developer experience is also important. So Playwright says, yes, we know from the past, it is important that developers are also happy when they write tests. We need to provide all the necessary tools that are available. Playwright has a different approach than Cypress, which you will also see later. And another very important thing, Playwright is backed by Microsoft. So the team of Playwright is actually working for Microsoft. So you can say Playwright in a way is a Microsoft product. Of course, open source, that's not the case, but it's backed by a huge company with enough resources. That's what I wanted to say. Good. The Playwright architecture. So first of all, because Playwright tests run outside of the browser, we can write tests in different programming languages. We can use, of course, TypeScript, which I will do that afterwards, Java, Python, or any of the .NET programming languages. And now comes the interesting part. Playwright, although it uses CDB, doesn't only support the Chromium family, but also Firefox and, in a way, Safari. With Firefox, it goes like this, that Firefox provides native supports for CDB, but Playwright in the very beginning wrote their own kind of bridge wrapper for Firefox. And for Safari, it's a little bit different, because we know that Safari more or less only runs on macOS, is available on macOS. But what Playwright did, they said, okay, we want to support all three different operating systems, all the three major operating systems. So we also want to provide some kind of a Safari testing capability. We can't use Safari, but what we can use is WebKit. That's the engine of Safari, and it's open source, it's globally available, and it also runs on all operating systems. So what Playwright did is they took WebKit, built a browser around it, which can be operated by CDB, and this is how we more or less can test WebKit or the Safari testing type. And as I've already said, Playwright supports all three major browsers. Operating systems, sorry. It's already very late. If we then again take an updated look to the download statistics, we see that Playwright is really catching up. So it's gaining more and more in terms of popularity. Developers are discovering it. It has already overtook already WebDriver IO, and it's just a question of time until it also overtakes Selenium WebDriver, and we see it kind of will be the first competitor of Cypress, the way how it looks like. Good. So this is about the theory. As I don't have so much time, I will just go directly dive into the code so that you have some kind of an impression how it feels when you work with Playwright. There was already a talk in the morning, which I have also seen. So there you have seen the code generator, which you can use. I'm more or less doing the same. So what you can do in Playwright, maybe first of all, you need to, of course, to install the dependencies, one step after the other. There's just one dependency that you need to install, and that's the add Playwright test. If you've done that, the second step would be that you execute Playwright so that it starts to download its browsers. So it's not like, for example, in Cypress, that Playwright says, I just pick any browser you have installed on your local machine, if I can support it, and I will use that one. You could kind of configure Playwright that it also does it, but normally Playwright has a linked version to the 3 browsers that it supports. And normally you need to download them once per version. I have already done this, and now I'm more or less already ready to start with my first test. And I'm using the code generator. This is some kind of recording feature. And the code generator is good for demonstration. But the point is, if you have very very many tests, then you usually have something like page objects, or in Playwright, we also have this concept of test fixtures. So you usually have some kind of abstraction layer again. And then, of course, the generated code cannot be copied one-to-one. It's more or less, you can see this some kind of a template, but you always need to kind of modify to your own needs. Good. So what I need to do, of course, the application needs to be running. This is also already the case. So I open the application, and what I want to do is, we have here a normal CRUD application, more or less, where I have a list of customers. And what I want to do, I want to edit or want to change the name of the first customer. In this case, this is Letizia. So I click on the edit button, then I change the first name, I click on save, then I click again on it, and you see that on the right side in the inspector, the code is already there. And now I can more or less copy it, and I have already my first running test. Right. So I can close this now. I need to go into the test folder. There I just say init spec.ts. No Python, something else. So new file. Yes. Oops. That was the wrong one. Sorry. Need to rerun it again. Looks like the copying didn't really work. I'll make it very quick. Localhost customers. I shouldn't have closed my recorder. Now I have to do everything again. Save in here. Copy it. No, it's not copied. Now it is. Yeah, we see here some kind of testing structure. Let's quickly go over it. So we see everything is imported by Playwright itself. We can say, we see also that the test itself always starts with async await. So Playwright doesn't hide asynchrony from us. We really have to deal with it. And more or less every line starts with the page object. So the page object, we start by navigating to our application. And then we have these kind of getter methods, which are kind of, or belong to the group of the so-called locators. So this is how in Playwright we can, in a way, select the elements. What is important to note about these locators is that they are not really already querying for the DOM element. It's just an information about the query itself. The execution of the selection of the selector actually happens when we add an action to it or an assertion. So in this case, as soon as I say click, Playwright starts to look for this particular DOM element. And it's not the case that Playwright passes on the actual DOM element to the click method. It stores just the information. It's an abstraction. It stores the information about the query itself, which sounds a little bit complicated, but the advantage is when the front end, in the meantime, starts to throw away or replace the DOM elements, then it doesn't do anything bad in terms of Playwright, because it never really, or we never really passed on the DOM element to the click element. It was always just the information. So Playwright can deal with situations where DOM elements are replaced all the time. We see that the locators or the get methods can be chained together, and in the end, we always end up with a click or with some other actions. You can type something into an input field. Everything is more or less possible. And at the very end, what we normally should have is some kind of assertion. So in this case, actually, this test in a way would already work, because if the element isn't there, I can't click on it and then the test would fail. But of course, it would be better if we end with a nice assertion. So what I can do is that I say here, I am expecting page get by text to be visible. So these are the assertions that Playwright has also built in. And now I could theoretically run the tests again from my command line, but I can also run it directly from VS Code. So Microsoft or Playwright team provides extensions for VS Code. So in the end, you need to install it, of course, and then you can run it. And the nice thing about these extensions is that you see here, once they are executed, the time it took for every line of code. So this is quite nice, but it gets even better because you can also debug the tests. And the debugging feature allows you to highlight or to interact directly from your source code with your test. So what I could do is that I add here a breakpoint. I just click on debug. And the browser will open again. It should navigate to our form field. And you see here, when I start to click on different lines in my code, that Playwright starts to highlight the element that it has found in this case. So when I'm not sure what I need to select, I can just change the selector in my code base or in my source code, and Playwright will automatically highlight it in the browser window. So this comes very handy. Of course, when I've done some changes, I need to save the file and then I need to rerun. But this is, of course, something which I would call very developer friendly. And that's not all of it. So it's not just that we can use the full debugging functionality of VS Code. We can even also use another IDE, because for a very long time, one of the main issues with Playwright was always that we were very closely bound to VS Code. So if somebody didn't like VS Code, you didn't have really a chance. You need to use it, because otherwise you had to work with the command line, and that was not very nice. What you can do these days, since the latest version, which is Playwright 1.32, you can say Playwright test and then --UI. Now Playwright starts in its UI mode, which kind of looks like the Cypress test runner. It has a watching method available, so it watches your testing file, it reruns them, and as you see all the different commands. You can see how the application looked like. For example, when I was looking here for this locator, I have also a pick locator where I could say, okay, I want to see what would be the selector for add customer and all that stuff. And of course, the same feature with highlighting something in the browser can also be done with the UI. So if I, for example, would say I am in the form again, and I say here input first name, then it would highlight here as well. So there are a lot of very good features in terms of developer experience. That's the latest one. One thing which is also very important about Playwright is the parallelization. So we can start up as many worker threads that we want. We can even run it in parallel within a test file. So if you have one file with 10 tests and you have the hardware resources available, then you can actually also parallelize the single test cases as well. So in terms of speed, this is, of course, a main benefit that Playwright has. You are not running that much easily into issues in terms of timing. But I'm not going to show it. I want to more or less focus on the last two slides that we have here, or actually it's three. There are way more features that I have shown here. I think that's clear. It's just 20 minutes. There is no way for me to show all these features that we have. There is one important thing I want to mention about Playwright, especially in comparison to Cypress. This is about component testing. So we see a trend that people start to use end-to-end frameworks for component testing as well. It works fine for Cypress. Unfortunately for Playwright, that's not the case at the moment, because Playwright requires Vite. So it says every framework that can be built on Vite is something that we support. And today from the community, we have two approaches. One is from Yunus Chaidi, who says, yeah, there is such a thing like versatile components, which means if we kind of strip the component from everything Angular specific, so there are some criteria what a versatile component is, it might be possible. To be honest, I've never tried it out. And the other approach is, of course, from Brandon Roberts from the Analog project. I think he will come right after me. So you will hear more about this project from him. He's working on a Vite integration for Angular. So if he manages to pull that off, then I think we can also expect component testing in Playwright as well. Last slide. I don't want to tell you what you should use. If Playwright is the best one, I can just give you some criteria that you need to ask yourself. Do you have issues in terms of timing? Are your tests running too slow? Then maybe Playwright is a good thing for you because you can parallelize them. Developer experience, you have seen the VS Code integration, the UI. Cypress has also something which is very good. Age, also in comparison to Cypress, Playwright is relatively young. So we see it's still growing. Playwright is more mature. Cypress is more mature. We see this in the documentation. There are recipes. There are answers for more or less every potential question that is out there. Yeah, testing outside of the browser, an issue with Cypress because we have limits. In Playwright, that's not the case. The question is, of course, always, do these limits actually apply to you? Do you have the need to run multiple tabs with your end-to-end framework or not? Component testing, I have already mentioned. Playwright, not so good at the moment. In terms of flakiness, I would say, again, if we compare only Cypress with Playwright, I would say they are more or less on the same level. Cypress in version 12 improved it even further. They have now this retryability for queries. So this is more or less the same concept that Playwright has with the locator, that it hides the internal logic to select elements. Not the same, but in a way it tries to fix it with the same approach. Yeah, and I think that's it. I have a little bit, I've overdone it for 2 minutes. Sorry for that, but I would now be finished with my talk. Thanks for watching, and if you have any questions, now might be a good time.